Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Welcome to everyone and Rene, Assam, welcome. And it's so nice to have you here today.
Hello. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's, guys, I always start every webinar or live stream with a little bit of appreciation for my amazing skills of like switching everything and the music. It's all clicked through. It's not like we can truly record this stuff. So always going live is quite funny because we have to keep it rolling. All right. So we are live on our platform. We are also live on LinkedIn. And today we're going to talk a bit about Brownfield. So maybe without further ado, we'll go start with quick round of intros. And for that, I will quickly jump and share my screen. So the topic today is Zalando's React Native migration, and we'll talk about everything about it in a second. In terms of the people that are here with us today, on behalf of Callstack, it's me, Mike. I'm CDO and founder, and I've been working with React Native for quite some time, almost 10 years now. And I'm also going to be the host, asking questions, moderating the chat, and making sure everybody's having a nice time today. Today with me is also Maciej and Jakub from Callstack. Maciej and Jakub, I will let you briefly introduce yourself as well.
Hello, I'm Maciej. I'm a software engineer at Callstack, and for the last couple of months, I've been working with Assam and Rene on the Zalando project, gradually adding more and more React Native to the application.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jakub. I'm business manager at Callstack. So for almost 3 years, I've been working with Callstack partners to help them bring React Native to their organization or help unlock its capabilities. So yeah, also been working with the amazing team at Zalando for some time. So happy to share some insights from this and other projects.
Awesome. Nice to have you guys today. And with us today, we have two special guests from Zalando, Renan and Assam. I will pass it over to you now.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm René. I'm software engineer at Zalando, roughly now since 4 years there. And especially since the last year also, I started this whole migration of going from native to React Native. And yeah, I still remember the very beginning from the very first POCs, and now finally also live on many screens in production. So yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you.
Yeah. And hi, I'm Qasim. I'm a senior principal software engineer at Zalando, and I come mainly from a web background. I've been at Zalando for almost 5 years now, and yeah, together with Rene and of course Maciej and the rest of you folks and the rest of the amazing Zalando client foundation and other client engineers, we are working now on this pretty big migration. And yeah, glad to be here.
Awesome. And before we start, I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for your time and for spending so much time on preparing for this webinar. I'm sure it's going to be great. The level of preparation you put into this was kind of similar to the technical effort you put into writing the article as well, which is interesting and exciting. And we'll go through it today. Let's quickly break it down. What's on the agenda today? Quite a few topics, so we'll try to be brief in some of them, but we will also dive deeper in where it is necessary. So first of all, we'll talk a bit about motivation. Why did you guys sort of decided to even start thinking cross-platform in the first place? Why React Native? And once all those decisions were made, I think company buy-in is also interesting for people to understand. How did you manage to convince everybody, and how did you start the migration? The rollout, so what actually happens after the buy-in, the architecture, what it's like in production, how you prove the case and continue, and what's up ahead. So basically the whole journey from the idea, hey, let's do it, ending up with, oh, wow, it's already running on my device. So I think we can start with the motivation. And I prepared a few screenshots of the mobile app, Rene and us. I'm not sure if you want to briefly talk about your front end. I can talk from the perspective of the consumer because I'm using the app, but I'm always love asking people behind the product their perspective on what is this and how do you think about the product?
Yeah, I guess I can take this. So Yeah, Zalando is basically the biggest fashion e-commerce and more than fashion, but mainly known for the fashion in Europe. And I think we have more than 50 million customers around Europe. And the main application, the customer-facing application of Zalando, basically has around or more than almost 90 screens. There are some similarities and differences. So there are, you could say that the some screens are a bit more similar than the others, but overall, if you want to count them, it's something around that number. And yeah, it's a end-to-end journey for customers who are interested in lifestyle, fashion, beauty, and I'm pretty sure I'm missing a lot of other subcategories there. And most recently, we are also have launched and are even looking into more initiatives around more engagement and more interesting content for the customers around visual feeds and so on. And yeah, I think that's a mobile application. And on the website, we also have a website that's, I think, around 800K routes overall in the web. And it includes different things that you can imagine. And yeah, that should be pretty much the scale of the application.
Nice. Thank you. And I have to say, I took the screenshots by borrowing the phone from my girlfriend. And I was like, hey, your app is going to be live. I'm always, surprised by how different people put the application to the limit. Like my basket is only like 1, 2 items. And she has so many options. I was actually debating for a while which one to screenshot. So I will be interested to understand later which of these experiences are React Native already, because that will be perhaps the first time in the history of this company where I can say to her, hey, listen, you're actually using React Native now. Because I think, it's great that that kind of consumer app is using React Native. Great. All right, guys. So we know what the application is like. So I think to kick it off, I wanted to ask you both, where did the idea for cross-platform even came from? I mean, at some point you started thinking, is React Native good? But I think there was something preceding that decision. I think we all would be curious what kind of challenges you were facing or problems you were trying to solve. What it was that native technologies couldn't deliver that made you think outside of the box and look towards React Native, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most obvious one is that we wanted to improve delivery speed, right? Like we wanted to give people much more power to build applications in multiple platforms. And also, when we did this decision about creating a new app or refactoring the app and using React Native, we had this perhaps a bit special case for Zalando where we had a web framework called Rendering Engine that we use internally, which you can imagine like Next.js. I think are called meta frameworks now, and it's shaped specifically for our Zalando needs. And by the time we thought about building a new native application or generally a new app, we had to keep this in mind because we thought, well, we have this React framework already. It is used in web so far only, but what is stopping us from reusing it in the apps thanks to React Native? Because in the end, it's just React, or it was just React for us and JavaScript. And this really opened for us the door, I would say, to go with React Native, because it also meant that instead of having to refactor and creating an app from nothing, from zero, and starting to build all kinds of features like data fetching, handling feature toggles, and all these kind of things that you need in any application, we already had thanks to this Meta framework. And that's kind of how it all started.
Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. So I think with that in mind, I wanted to ask, how did you land on the React Native in first place? You mentioned the rendering engine, so I'm guessing part of that decision was related to it. But also, what else was that? What was it about React Native that you sort of felt like was primary driving factor for choosing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think also as me and also Hazem coming from web, I think one of the first things that you notice as any web developer when you use React Native is that everything is very familiar, right? Like it's not some new technology. I mean, it is, but it's not like you need to learn everything from scratch. You have everything from sort of CSS to HTML, and everything is super familiar. And if you already build a website with React, you're very capable to also build an application in React Native.
Mhm.
And I think this is a superpower that we definitely didn't want to miss out on.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I also have this beautiful slide that sums it up perfectly. So it is great to know, and I think typically it seems to be a very common theme amongst many players or companies choosing React Native. I think reusing the existing talent or your knowledge, or particularly your previous prior art, is always very helpful in this case. And with that in mind, I wanted to kind of move over to the next question, which is, what are technologies were on the table? What was it that you evaluated? Was there anything that you were looking at while thinking about solving those challenges rather than React Native?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we tried to make a wide investigation to figure out what's really the best solution. But in the end, for us, it's not that the other technologies, we looked briefly into Kotlin multi-platform, for example. We also looked in just, let's say, pure native applications. But in the end, the problem wasn't that these are not great or anything, but more all these pro arguments for React Native just counterweighted them. It's there were so many positive effects also by using this framework that I mentioned, this rendering
Mhm.
engine framework, that it was a very clear answer that, okay, this gives us a very good starting point because it gives us so many things for free, essentially, by reusing lots of code. And additionally, helps us to really unify our experience across different platforms. We no longer have to build one thing in the web, then another thing in Android, and then yet another thing on iOS.
Okay, so you choose React Native, right? And I think it's kind of obvious for some people in the organization, especially for organizations with this strong web DNA with React, that React Native might be a good choice. But I think it's not that obvious for everyone. So I was curious, how do you navigate such a significant technical change with existing successful native teams?
Yeah, I mean, for us to understand that, I think it's probably very important to think about some of the context, what was happening and what had happened before for this move. And yeah, the native apps in Zalando, more than 10 years have been in progress. So there are a lot of very experienced teams and engineers already working on those for many, many years. And the thing is that there was already an initiative internally to look into re-architecturing and modernizing these frameworks. And that was a big help or an important factor in this move, because we were looking into the problems that we were facing in the apps. And you think of it with this mindset that the main theme was that we want to platformize, we want to centralize more and provide reusability and try to improve the time to market and speed through reusability and the centralization, basically. Yeah, what that led to was the fact that we were looking into different options. And as Rene mentioned, the native option to rewrite and start from scratch was, of course, one of the options. Looking into other ways of cross-platform. And of course, in this context, it becomes very important when you compare other options together and then the pros and cons and how fast you can achieve something. And the fact that you can show that you can reuse some of the successful experiences that you had. Like, for example, the rendering engine framework has been running in Zalando around 2018, has always been upgraded, changed, like adding the concurrent mode and so on. So it was showing and giving confidence that there is a successful experience here that you can rely on and reuse. And yeah, so to reach there, first of all, we had to do a lot of homework. So it wasn't just that we can show up and say, oh, by the way, we have this idea and let's do this huge migration and change everything, right? So we had to, almost everything that you would claim, you had to have a lot of documentation or research behind it, or maybe more important than research, to show it with a POC. So yeah, we did a lot of, I would even use the word extreme amount of investigation and research. We prepared a lot of content to provide that results to the different stakeholders. And we tried to be as honest as possible. So we provided both the pros and cons or risks or the areas that there were unknowns that we knew about, or even things that we knew there might be surprises. We didn't know about them now, but we're pretty sure that there will be some unknowns that we will face along the way. And yeah, so that was the basis to have to do that homework, and then to communicate very clearly with the stakeholders, with the teams, with the leads, and so on, and go through different layers of the company and talk and provide this information and communicate. And I want to say that again, the having a POC when you talk to the stakeholders, especially and the leads, does most of the talking for you. So we were able to show that what's possible with giving an app and saying you can test it here, and this is a combination of our internal rendering engine with React Native built in a very short time. And one more thing to consider is that such change is always quite complicated, and in such a scale, it's even doubly complicated. So you have to be open and honest again about the side effects. What impact does it have on people to be open and to understand the amount of questions and maybe even doubts that might come up, and keep the dialogue going and keep providing information.
Thank you. That is very interesting. I wonder, since you mentioned POC for validation, a common theme that I see, a common challenge or question I often get asked when we speak about React Native adoption is not only the buy-in from the business stakeholders, but also the buy-in from other technical teams. And I think POC, KPIs, these are very easy to grasp for the business people as well. Maybe for some React Native bullish teams as well, but there might be some native engineers or fans of other technologies. How do you navigate such a change internally? I assume you have a lot of engineers, and that might be, the answer might be specific to your internal culture, but to a certain degree, I think there might be some universal patterns that could be helpful for everybody. Say, we want to show everybody, hey, this is great, and you should embrace it. How do you navigate such a change?
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, because there was exactly two sides of the discussion. One is to make a point for business and lead, and I want to say that POC was a big part of that, but also the fact that we were able to de-risk the migration. And by de-risk, I mean, imagine this scale application with this many consumers and this many teams working on it. You can't just propose that, we are going to work on the rewrite of the app in a year, and then we roll it out like a big bang replacement. And there is no going back. Like you roll out this new binary on the app stores, and then maybe if there's a problem, we'll roll forward and provide a new binary altogether, and which is the previous one, or so on. And that's not how things are done in Zalando. Like we do a lot of A/B tests. We check even the smallest changes with data and looking at how the customers react, if they like this or not, and so on. So we were able to do this de-risking by relying on the Brownfield approach. And I think this will be a big part of our discussion today. But just to quickly explain, the Brownfield versus Greenfield comes from the idea of whether you are dealing with a new project from scratch without having to deal with the legacy that was there, or you are building on top of something that already exists and try to change. Of course, this introduces a lot of complexities, but it allows the application and the business to do the change in steps and in a very controlled manner. We did the investigation on this area and then made sure that this is a possibility, and made that our choice that we are going to do this change through this Brownfield approach, which allows us to then roll out React Native on a specific screens with a specific traffic or other targeting options, like maybe a different country or market and so on. And the other one was the POC, but I think POC had also an impact on the non-stakeholders, like the other teams and engineers, because one of its big points was that it was done by reusing the existing framework. And we had this we had measured this fact, actually, that the whole POC was done by 1.5 full-time engineering effort in 15 days. And you had an app with multiple screens that was really looked like a real Zalando app almost. And of course, it wasn't even near being production ready, but it looked like a working app and with real data and so on, tracking and observability and so on. And it was done by this amount of effort just because we were able to reuse. And the idea of being able to use an existing platform with interesting features that you don't have to build everything from scratch and deal with mundane or painful stuff, that was also a big winner when talking with different teams. And yeah, I think on both sides, it was also ensuring the involved folks, like from both stakeholders and the teams, that there are a lot of interesting opportunities and features and capabilities that we will be able to use both on the engineering side and what you could provide for the business in the end.
What I think you were able to build such a strong case internally is that you thought about the migration, not like a interim solution to bridge native and React Native, but rather like a long-term strategy. But I'm curious if there's were any particular challenges or concerns that your teams brought up and how you tackled those. There are misconceptions about React Native, like performance always comes up, right? Some articles on web about
Or async bridge, and stuff.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think the famous Klarna article is always popping up where not Klarna, Airbnb, that migrated away. And of course, this pops up everywhere, right? But that's what also Hazem mentioned, is that we did our homework in that sense, that we try to really collect and gather lots of different opinions and then try to answer them as good as possible. And also, a lot of these performance complaints that are sort of a bit known in the React Native space were also before the new architecture, right? So by being able to tell, look, this is something that improved in the last, couple of years, it was easy to update people and say, okay, look, this is no longer up to date, and here there were several solutions for this.
Cool. Yeah, the article had very strong impact. I wish articles like yours were, had even bigger one. Although I have to say, the work, I really applaud the work that you're doing on publishing those learnings. Just like, I don't know, for example, Shopify is doing as well. Like, these are very helpful resources. And I know it's not easy for enterprise or bigger companies to navigate around different legal concerns and talk about things you do under the hood. And that's why the fact that you wrote the article and you're here today is it's amazing for growing the React Native ecosystem as well. All right. So I think I will quickly recap what I think we discussed in this section. And I think based on what you both guys told us today, reusing talent and resources across platforms was one of the very strong decisive factors. Reusing the core framework or the learnings around the rendering engine, time to market for new features. And I think having that Brownfield POC that does not harm the other part of the app, that seems to me like the theme that we kind of talked through for this section. Anything else you guys would like to sort of emphasize in that on that front?
Yeah, I think one point to add is that on core business metrics, the idea was that we are not doing this migration to just immediately improve, for example, time to render something on a specific screen, right? Or increase the click-through rate of a specific element in somewhere else. So the idea was that this is inherently more of a technical migration. So on the KPI side or in the business metric side, the idea was that our goal, our first and foremost important one, is that we will not harm at the level of the metrics that we have today. If we get improvement in any area, performance and so on immediately, of course, that will be a big bonus. And we will definitely work on improving the performance once the bigger steps of the migration are done and we are in a more comfortable state. But yeah, the idea was that initially the goal is to make sure that the business just continues as usual.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Great. We now know a little bit about your application, the decision, this decisive factors or the process. Everybody's locked in and that's the direction. How do you roll this out? And more specifically, I'm curious about your migration strategy. Say, like, you want to get this React Native Brownfield into production. What are the screens or components that you sort of point down as, okay, this is going to be perfect candidate for the migration?
Yeah, so I mean, in the very beginning, when we really did the very first rollout of the first screen, like we really chose something that we knew that has a very low risk, even in worst case, there is something going wrong. So for us, that was essentially a screen that had a very low amount of traffic, so not many customers using it. And for us, it was a perfect target screen to not necessarily prove, let's say, performance or prove that the technology works super well, but rather really prove the stability, making sure that initialization of React Native works and doesn't impact anything of the existing app, and just making sure that we can actually render something using this brownfield approach onto the screen to the customers. And we put like really everything we did, we always put behind feature toggles so that at any time from the backend side, we could control this. So even if there is something going wrong, we can just turn it off. Or we can also use it to do different tests, like activating it for some time, making sure that everything on the business metrics looks fine, and then activate it again and so on. And with this, we were really able to safely roll this out step by step. And then later at some point, when we had more confidence and knew, okay, we had the first things proved, we also tried to look for specific screens that come with, let's say, specific requirements. Like some screens might have a lot of media content, like lots of images, lots of videos. So that's a good page then to test exactly this out and make sure that this works well with React Native. Or some screens have very long lists or these sort of infinite scrollable lists that require lots of performance using our flat list and so on. And with these different requirements in mind, we kind of step by step chose screens that fit this criteria, and that way we could use it to step by step validate different assumptions about React Native and really validate, okay, performance works, media content works, generally the stability is okay. And because everything is behind feature flags, we were in a pretty safe spot.
Okay. No. Yeah. But I wanted to share my perspective on that. So it wasn't like we started with the easiest screen and then gradually increased the difficulty. Rather, we started with the easiest and then went straight to very difficult ones to prove the point that you can do it. And if this could be delivered, then all of the rest would be also deliverable. But yeah, the risking strategies, the A/B testing, these are really game changers in terms of like safety nets, in terms of maintaining stability of the app while also getting real user statistics, comparing that to the previous implementation, finding some places when we still need to make adjustments, fixing that, trying that again, and getting to the point where we are really happy with the screen we're building.
I really like this two-step approach because I remember from your conversation, Mike, with Shopify on our podcast, is that they tackled the hardest screen like straight away. And I think you guys found like a good solution to both deliver something quickly, have this strong case with the POC to show to the team, but then to avoid any kind of concerns around can React Native handle X, Y, Z, you already tackle like a very hard part of the application next. Right. So I think that was like a very, very good step in terms of both testing React Native and like showing some results very quickly.
Yeah. Go ahead, Renee.
Yeah, just one thing I wanted to say also on this. I mean, for performance, it's also for us, it was coming especially from web. We knew that measuring performance is usually done through like core web vitals, where you have things like LCP, like the largest contentful paint. Coming then into React Native, we first also had to establish what does it actually mean to measure performance? Like what kind of metrics are we looking for? Because there is no, or not yet at least, no built-in LCP or FCP even. So for us, it was also important to even make this measurement possible in the first place to create this metric, which we called meaningful render, which essentially measures the time until the first meaningful. It's depends a bit on the screen, but usually it's like a large picture or the major piece of the screen that is above the fold, and measure until how much time it takes until this particular component is visible to the customer. And then this way we sort of had a similar LCP like metric just for the apps. And this way, only this way we could really, or were able to measure that, okay, performance works.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you this question later because it was actually asked on the chat as well. And I'm going to use this time to encourage everybody to keep asking, and we will try to answer a few, and for the rest, we'll follow up later. Before I ask this, I just wanted to say that your migration strategy or approach kind of combines the two approaches that circulate in the community, which is de-risk and start with low hanging fruits. And then the sort of other one that I recently read an article on Shopify's blog was start with whatever is most critical. Because if that works, you're good. So it's kind of like you tried both, and that's an interesting hybrid mode. Going further to my question, I wanted to follow up on the metrics, Renee. I think it is interesting when you say about measuring the performance. How do we even define the performance when we are dealing with a brownfield hybrid environment where we have React Native, which is, JS, a bit of native bridging. And then the question that was asked, and that is a very good question, is how do you define the metrics that you can rely on comparing them to the native counterparts and decide that, okay, hey, this is actually performing better? Is that something performance related, or I don't know, maybe you're okay degrading slightly the performance in favor of code sharing, or something more about CPU and resources? Just curious, how did you measure that one in context of Brownfield?
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's a mix of both performance metrics, but also business metrics. Because in the first place, why we want to have fast experiences is that we want to ensure a good customer experience. And in the end, the best way to measure that is using business KPIs. And with this, we can prove that even if there is a performance problem, or even if it's worse, or if it's better, like how much does this even affect then the business metrics? But to also answer the measurement, like in this brownfield approach, I think it's not unfortunately an easy solution or easy way to do it. But in the end, what we are trying to do, or did try, is that we really have the same metric in both worlds and then run A/B tests so that this meaningful render metric that I mentioned can be compared against something that we have on native on, in our case, literally the same screen. And then we can directly see, okay, there is a difference of, I don't know, X milliseconds or seconds. And with this, it becomes very clear, like what's the difference in performance. But the disclaimer still is that in the end, the way native renders and the way we render something with React, especially because we use suspense, where we progressively render content from top to bottom, is a bit different. Like in our native apps, for example, we usually render the whole UI in one go, essentially. And in React Native, we render it step by step, like this progressive rendering with suspense. So there's not exactly the 100% same metric on both sides, but at least you get something close enough that you can then compare. And then if you also look at the business metrics, how much this performance degraded or even improved.
Yeah, I mean, just to add a minor point to that is when you have so much difference on the implementation of different bits and pieces, you can't you can't define the metrics as, I don't know, for example, when I get this internal process or task done, like there are too many differences that all of that goes out the window. And what you're left with is a shared starting point and a shared ending point. And in the middle, maybe there are two different worlds, but I care when I start the app and when I see this particular content the first time. And this almost worked for us because the meaningful render is basically that. And you can say the first time I see this banner on the native app, and then the same time I see the same banner on the React Native, minus the timestamp of the starting of the app. And that almost gives you a feeling of the performance.
That makes sense. And just quickly, just to sort of wrap up this sort of discussion on the metrics. Would same metrics apply for the POC as well? Assuming that you have a POC up and running, I think now that we're talking about numbers, did you also use the same sort of domain of metrics to verify, okay, this POC is a good idea, or considering it was a POC, we're looking at something different, maybe not so performance related? Just like, oh my God, it is working and does not increase the bundle size by like 50%.
Yeah, I actually think it was kind of a combination of those because to full transparency, we didn't have one POC or we didn't have one validation phase. We had, I want to say 3. And each phase was validating something. The first round was to show that we can ship this internal React framework card rendering engine into mobile apps through React Native, and it works. And it's not awful. So there we weren't measuring the time of rendering something or the other. It was that we were giving the app to different people and saying, work with it. Is it awful? No, it seems to work okay. Like it's not as smooth as the app, but it was an app built by 1.5 person in 15 days. And we didn't spend time on its performance improvements, right? And then in every stage, we were validating more and more. And finally, when we are going to production, we were actually validating, as René mentioned, the real metrics based on real user data, not even our test devices.
Awesome. That makes sense. I think we've covered this very, very, very thoroughly. Awesome. One thing I wanted to ask, and I think René, you mentioned the A/B testing, and that gets me curious. What were other techniques, we can call them techniques, feature flags, A/B testing? I think you mentioned that you sort of applied during the rollout, during the rollout to production. What were the tactics that you used further along the process?
Yeah, I mean, we used a lot of these techniques. In the very beginning, the first screen that I also mentioned, we even started with internal beta testers. This was essentially a group of Zalando employees that manually opted into what we call the beta test. And this way we could even roll out to, I mean, it's a very small group, but at least it was something that we could use for very early testings and just to also show it to stakeholders and so on. Then most of the time we are using A/B tests and try to really compare 50% of traffic with the other 50% of traffic and use that to look at the different metrics and make sure that everything is running smoothly and fine. And on top of that, because also Zalando is operating in multiple markets, we also had the choice to sometimes only roll out to a specific market. Like, for example, we could roll out something only to Germany or any other market. And usually the way we roll out screens is we usually start with a lower amount of traffic. Like we usually start with, I don't know, let's say 1% traffic depending on the screen. And then as we gain more confidence and as we see that all our metrics are looking fine and everything is good, then we start to increase the traffic until we either hit the 50% target or we even go for 100%.
Do you also do anything in those staged rollouts, considering different markets and users? Is there some kind of a factor that is device specific, such as Android, iOS, maybe lower level, higher end devices?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely had different rollouts for different platforms like Android and iOS, but we didn't really go beyond that. Like we didn't do something like, okay, only rollout for a specific Android version or only different types of device. At least as far as I remember, we never did this, but we definitely had this platform-specific rollouts because either there was maybe an important bug that was remaining in one of the platforms, or there was maybe a performance issue in one of the platforms, and then we didn't want to block the other platform just because of that. And this way we could still smoothly roll out wherever it works.
Cool. Great. Thanks for providing that additional context. So I think now we can go to the architecture, which is going to be a more technical deep dive into how you actually made it happen. which is, if you read the Zalando article, which is great resource, and we'll link it later, is also here in the chat. Some of those things may seem familiar, although here you might be able to ask some questions, and we will also break this down. So for that one, I wanted to start with a question on the challenges that you faced while integrating React Native. In your article, there is a description of how you made it, which is a novel approach, approach that solves a lot of problems. And I'm sure that this is a result of the challenges that you run across. So I kind of wanted to briefly ask you on like the biggest pain points or the things that you knew that we have to solve this from the technical standpoint.
Yeah, I can start a bit, and then I think Maciej can also add a lot as someone worked on this firsthand. And from our side, like especially in the beginning, the question was like, how do we do this brownfield in the first place? Because there are not so many. I mean, I think by now it changed a bit, but at the time, at least, there wasn't a lot of documentation about the specific space. Like, it's not like you will find something easy, like step-by-step guide, and then you just have it, and then you have the perfect architecture. But rather, at the time, we first started, okay, what do we want to have from this React Native brownfield architecture? And for us, it was clear that because we are building a new architecture with React Native and this internal rendering engine framework, it was important that we try to encapsulate it as much as possible so that whatever we do there is mostly independent from the rest. Because sometimes, especially when you build new architectures and you start new projects, as soon as you start to integrate them into existing applications, you inherit almost some of the technical depths of that existing system. And we really wanted to avoid this and try to really work on this as almost like a separate app, you could say. And hence we came to this conclusion where we said, we don't want to build React Native like as you normally do right in your app, but rather we want to build our React Native application as a library, so to say, and consume this in the existing apps as a SDK or just like any other SDK that renders some UI to the point where the existing app would not even have to know that this is React Native. It's just some SDK that provides and renders UI essentially. I think, and this was the overall idea at the time. But yeah, going for this was quite challenging because there's nothing in that space that was existed that just did it. And that's where I think Maciej maybe can also add here.
Yeah.
I think it was a very interesting time in the beginning when we did this library.
Yeah, I remember when joining you at that stage when we helped to make React Native into library, into framework. So I remember the initial code that you tried to do was follow basically the official documentation from a React Native website, which to summarize the approach is like create a new React Native application from temp and then bring your native apps into Android folder, into iOS folder. But to be honest, this sounds easier than it actually is because there is a lot of small and annoying challenges. To give you some examples, on the Android side, you have things like Kotlin version. Your application might use some Kotlin version. I remember you were very up to date. You used like even later version than React Native recommended. So that was one of the challenges. And on the iOS side, example would be React Native using CocoaPods. This is, to be honest, considered very ancient in the native iOS, let's say, developer ecosystem, where SPM, Swift Package Manager, is the dominant approach. So there are all of these changes that would have to be imposed on the native applications, and that was really troubling. And there was a lot of connection points between these two worlds when the native architecture could impact React Native ones, and also React Native would force some changes to the native apps, which wasn't beneficial for either of the sides. So what we was this concept when we package React Native neatly into native frameworks. This is XT framework in the case of iOS and AAR in the case of Android, and you just consume it in the native application as a native library. You are not aware outside that this is React Native. You don't see any React Native types. It's just some interfaces. And by the way, these were not some Turbo modules, React Native specific interfaces. These were just plain iOS or Android interfaces, which
we also had the ability to shape to the needs of the applications. Yeah, we have here a nice graph showing that.
Yeah, I think, Maciej, I think, and sorry if I disturbed you by showing it, but I wanted to pull this up from the article because the one I have in the slides is not so readable without the colors. So you briefly spoke about the AARNX framework. The overall idea of packaging React Native as a standalone package that does not affect the overall experience is great for the reasons you mentioned. Now, once you package it as a standalone package, my question is, and I believe it is here on the slides as well, on the diagram as well, but I would love if you could guys talk a bit about it as well, is how these two interact with each other, sharing the data or maybe interacting with some of the services that I guess the host, in this case, the host application is already using, I don't know, login or maybe something for the payments.
Yeah, the general idea was that we use the dependency injection approach. So it means that on the React Native side, on this framework, what we call framework, we define interfaces of, let's call them communication layers. Like these are interfaces, for example, that contains a function for adding a product to the wish list, because the wish list handling is still done by the existing native application. So we define this interface with add to wish list function. And for all that matters from the React Native code, we assume that whoever uses this framework will provide an implementation for this interface. So that then in the native side, when integrating this framework, it also needs to provide an implementation. And in there, they can freely use the existing app internals to then actually execute the code necessary for, in this case, add to wish list. And this way we are coupling the applications sort of together, but in the end, we still have a properly defined API between these two and sort of remove the dependency of each other.
Yeah, and to give you more context, we have a lot of these, let's say, services or communications because we have different kinds of data. Like, you can imagine in Zalando that the most important data structures probably cards holding your products you want to buy. But there is also wish list. There are things like native device capabilities, for example, notifications, some authentication data being shared as well. So a lot of these small concerns which were already handled by the native application. So we didn't want to rewrite it from scratch or to use some separate implementation from general purpose libraries because there would be subtle differences. There would be issues with sharing state, etc. So we created this. This is very classic dependency injection as you use in, I know, backends in Java, for example. So the reason why we needed dependency injection is normally in the JavaScript code, you can see all of the application native code. But here it was slightly different because we were providing some part of the application, but we didn't provide the other things. So the application depended on the React Native Brownfield framework. So we needed to clarify the data we expected, the events we might be listening in this service contract, and then ask the application. And by the way, we have like inside the main application, the Zalando final application you can download from App Store. You also have like testing app which provides very dummy implementation, and we use that for testing as well. So you can implement the interface in a different ways if needed.
Great. 1 second, because now I have to share the screen again. So there is one thing I caught in the article I wanted to present here, and I think that was something that stood out. The dependency injection, and then like sharing those services, that's a very thoughtful design. And obviously, as a result of it, I can also see you put a lot of effort into making sure the React Native's developer experience is also somewhat easier working in your environment. That's why you decided to extend the dev menu with some specific options to make your day life a bit easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was quite important for us. And also one thing that happened is that, of course, we enable lots of people to work with React Native, to work on our apps, including web engineers, app engineers, everyone. And If you ever done this sort of native setup, then you will very, very likely and soon run into issues, let's say with Xcode or Gradle, or some weird caches are invalidated and so on. And we wanted to really ensure that we reduce these problems by taking this application that you just shown and upload its binary to a place where everyone can download it. And then what we did is we just used this binary and let it connect to the local running Metro bundler. So it's a bit like Expo Go, I would say, where you just scan a QR code and then it connects to whatever environment you want. And this way you can completely skip all sorts of compilation. You can just straight up work with React Native, do your code changes, everything works, and it gives you a very quick start. And by time we just added more and more features to it. Like we also added a way to look at our storybooks for our component library, so they can seemingly switch between these different applications. Sort of, you can just look briefly at the storybook, look at components available from our component library, and then go back to the application, use them, and so on. And just generally, like you said, making our lives easier.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really good way to extend it. And it's a tiny little detail that you can do with React Native, but sometimes can really make your life much easier. Also, we spoke a bit about the architectural choices, bringing it in, the packaging. So I think we now have slightly better understanding of the reasons behind your architecture as well. One thing I wanted to talk a bit about from your article as well, based on your learnings, was the UI. Obviously, for the most part, we often think about sharing the business logic. UI is often tricky. Sometimes, depending on your application's layout, you can get more of it across Android and iOS. And I think in the case of your application, your UI is very distinctive, which seems like a good candidate for sharing UI. But then also, some people go beyond that and they go to web. So now when I remember your mentioning of your rendering engine and reading your article, seems like the universal code base was something that was really appealing to you. So I'm curious on how did you approach that? Why did you specifically decide to choose the technologies you chose for that? And how is it working out so far?
Yeah, I also have to say that we are also quite early on this stage, because right now we have most of our components written in React Strict DOM, making them like very accessible also in the web. But it's not actively being used in production at this point, at least. So we're sort of exploring this. We definitely want to go with this approach, because we think, especially on this component layer where we build a bunch of components that are designed in our own design system, they are literally the same for web and app. So they are a good target to build in any sort of cross-platform way. And we did a bunch of explorations from React Strict DOM, React Native Web, and in the end, we chose React Strict DOM because we believe that it's the one that is the most, perhaps not the most major one yet, but I think it's the one that has the biggest future ahead, looking at others who start using React Strict DOM. And also, for us, it's always the question when you do this cross-platform UI is, do you make React Native components as they are cross-platform and make them available in web using something like React Native Web? Or do you take the web and bring it to the app where you say, okay, we have, exactly like you see here, either you make your view and translate it to a div later on, or you literally take a div and translate it to a view back again, which we chose the React Strict DOM approach. But for us, what's also important is that because we put this in our UI library, it's mostly abstracted away from anyone using it. Like everyone using these components don't necessarily have to care whether it's Strict DOM, React Native Web, or for all it matters, it could even have a different implementation for each platform. And that way, I think we are in a good spot that even if we are trying, or if we are changing something in the future, we are still in a good spot.
Yeah, I mean, we already have a few cases of different implementations that are there in the UI library. And the idea is that with this layering and these abstraction layers, you allow, because we do think that there will be some UI differences that we want to stick to. because of the differences of the platforms, and that makes the experience more familiar and more enjoyable for the customer. So the point is that you make them as local as possible and abstracted away down to the UI layer. So once you build that, you can choose to have one file implementing Android, iOS, web, or you can go to the other spectrum and have 3 files for Android, iOS, and web. But in the end, the API at the higher level is the same. So it allows you to consume that component in the what we call the renderers, which is the language from rendering engine, which allows you to then connect to the business logic and so forth without having to worry about whether this is a slightly different or exactly the same platform.
Yeah. And I think that's the platform specific imports that you mentioned in the article, right? And here I have this example that I took from your article, which I think talks about the icon component and the different ways, the different way of bringing that up. You also had mentioned the React Strict DOM compat, which I think in this case, this slide is really relevant just to show how you can abstract away different things and how you can even bring some further cross-platform components. So I guess there's so many options how we can do this, either at a library level, component level. You can do it inside the component, depending on your preference. Cool. Okay. So what about the styling? In your article, I read you are using StyleX for that. Is it just for the cross-platform library that you're building, the components library, and everything that you want to run universally? How is that working out for you so far?
Yeah, I would say it's both for making it cross-platform. Again, like it brings a couple of CSS-like features to React Native that don't exist in pure React Native. So that makes it much nicer to use, especially if you have a web background. But we also use it for what we call theming. Like we have this system, this called tokens, where we have a bunch of variables like background colors, different padding sizes, different font sizes, and so on. And what we use with StyleX is it makes it very nicely possible that all these variables can be defined as like normal JavaScript variables. But internally, StyleX translates this to proper CSS. At least on web, it literally translates to CSS. And on React Native, it goes back to the React Native style sheet. And with this, we can nicely use or have a nice theming capability so that at any time, even during runtime, we can change the theme, or you can use multiple themes in different layers of the UI. And this is where StyleX also helps quite a lot. So in the end, it's a mixture of cross-platform and making CSS a bit more advanced and making this theming possible.
Yeah, an interesting aspect of that is when you use React Strict DOM, you are actually very encouraged to use StyleX. It's called their CSS, but underneath it's StyleX. And it's quite interesting contrast because when you use React Strict DOM, you use divs, spans, all of the things from the web world. But the StyleX itself, the way you create style sheets with that for web, is actually resembling very much the original style sheet API from React Native. It goes 2 ways, to be honest.
All right. And now with the React Native code already on production, I'm curious, how are you further building on top of what you already delivered and build up the case for even more React Native integration based on this data?
Yeah, so the thing is that we set out based on some, you could call them assumptions or promises. And probably the most important ones being that the fact that we can reuse our internal framework, we can reuse our internal resources and knowledge to build upon or build on top of the existing experience around React, around rendering engine and web and so on. And of course, the idea that we can onboard and transition or reskill other engineers who haven't worked with React before, and to show that this is a possibility to expand into this new area as well. And this was basically already proven to be possible and to be the case. there was another factor, which was we initially started as we mentioned, there were several validation phases that we wanted to show that, okay, this technology works in combination with the other. Then we go to the Brownfield, then we check the performance metrics and so on and so forth. And then we want to test a few screens first and see how they perform. And in reality, the fact that all of this worked as expected, or more or less as expected, and we were able to roll out screens to production, led to a pretty huge interest from a bunch of different teams and organizations around Zalando to also migrate their areas into React Native. And the idea was that we were going to go towards that goal, but it happened much faster than expected. So we are now dealing with a lot and a big number of migrations happening almost at the same time. Some of them have already been rolled out and so on. So these 2 points basically were proven: the fact that we can reuse our internal framework successfully, the fact that we can reuse our existing engineering knowledge and even onboard other teams. And one interesting fact probably here for you is that 2 of the first screens, the important ones that were rolled out to production, were built by teams that were fully native engineers previously. So we had teams that were exactly, and they learned, they onboarded, and then they were able to both work with React Native and the rendering engine framework, which was a React framework, and ship out screens that were actually very important for the business. They were new screens, new experiences for the user, and they shipped them out quickly in very short times. And the fact that the framework focuses on modularity, it allowed some other screens afterwards to reuse bits and pieces from the existing screen and then roll out some other screens on top of that. So this has been kind of a domino effect going on so far.
That's a really cool story. I'll come back to the results in a moment, but I think for you as a platform team and kind of like enablers at this early stages of the Brownfield migration, right? I think it's like biggest success you can think of when teams are volunteering to migrate next experiences, and you have kind of like already backlog to what you want to tackle next. I'm curious, like, because this kind of success and this attitude inside the organization doesn't come out of nowhere. So I'm curious, like, how you shared the results, how you build up maybe like a little bit of hype inside Zalando to encourage other teams to consider moving their experiences to React Native.
Yeah, I mean, the idea from the beginning was somewhat sounded too good to be true, right? The fact that we don't have to spend time on building a new architecture, we can reuse this thing that has been successful and then some things on top. And that was kind of a main driving point here, that the idea itself was very interesting. And what we had to do was to show that the idea was real, that was possible. So the fact that this happened through the first phases and the rollout of the screens, that almost automatically kind of validated the initial hype, you could say. And then yeah, I think the fact that, if you remember, I mentioned that initially there was this idea to re-architecture our native apps. And one of the most important themes in there was to provide some centralized feature and focus on platformization of the apps. And that was also another thing that was very interesting. The teams were able to use the platform and not have to deal with a lot of complicated things and just focus on building cool and exciting customer experiences and new features and so on. So I think that all of that was lending to the fact that yeah, this was an exciting idea.
Awesome. I think that's a great approach of showing that maybe not one day is better than another, but maybe it just simply aligns better with what the business priorities are, right? And you mentioned, Asen, that the two screens were migrated by the native teams. I wanted to ask about like the overall results, the quantitative, qualitative results of the migration so far.
Yeah, I think in total there have been around 4 screens fully rolled out. And by fully, we mean that the tests and the metrics have been checked and approved and they are fully done. we have around 12 screens that are currently rolled out, but in tests like A/B tests and different kinds of monitoring states to make sure that they are performing as expected. And I think there's around 7 other screens that are also code completed. But yes, thank you. They are code completed. Yeah. Yeah, they are waiting for their turn, so to speak. So there are a lot of timelines internally in the company, so the screens have to align and then we'll be able to roll out. And there's a lot of other migration going on at the same time, but not talking on the number of a screen level. I think what we are planning is that by the end of the year, early 2026, we will, yes, thank you for the cool feature. And yeah, we'll arrive around 90% of the traffic of the app being on React Native. And the idea is that we will continue this and hopefully we will reach a state that, yeah, we can have almost completely the whole app in React Native. And very important point here is that when we say the whole app is in React Native, it doesn't mean that there is no native implementation of different parts of the app, but that will be done through the Turbo modules and Fabric components and different technologies that allow you to implement something in native when you need to, which we already have a lot of them. But the idea is that the skeleton of the app comes out of this brownfield setup and goes into greenfield, if you.
That's awesome. These are really impressive goals for a company of your size and the product of your size. Aiming for 90% is amazing. I mean, considering that we've been sort of seeing those brownfield migrations for a while now. Every company has a different pace. Some get stuck at some point on purpose and just keep it like that for quite some time. This seems like a very ambitious, all-in, bullish approach, and that is a very inspiring goal. 90% by 2026. That's like all major flows will be covered by that time, I guess.
Yeah, and maybe an interesting thing is that screen that I mentioned that was one of the first two that were built by native engineers is the home screen. Chances are it's being rolled out currently in based on market and so on, but until end of the year, you will probably, whenever you open Zalando and go to the home screen, that's the right.
Awesome. That's awesome. And for two reasons. First of all, because that's like the main screen. And second of all, that was also one of the questions I had from the audience. So you nailed it, two questions at once. Amazing. So the very last question before I shoot you with some other questions, although I have to say we've been covering all of the questions as we go. So at this time, it seems like we're pretty good. I wanted to ask, what's up ahead? You have a working integration, you're migrating other screens. You either already know that you will need to build some other services or features around, or you know that maybe you fast track in certain places and you need to take a step back. What are the things that you want to focus on when it gets cooler and the shopping season is slightly less intense? What's already sort of lining up on your roadmap?
I mean, you mentioned the shopping season. That's a very important event of the year for Zalando. So there are a lot of plans that are coming together around this season already for screens and the rollouts. But from, let's say, the platform or foundation side of things, the idea is that we will be focusing on answering or cleaning up some of the technical debts that have happened throughout the migration so far. And that's basically a fact of life when you do engineering work, especially in this scale. You always have to make trade-offs and create some technical debts along the way. And now we are going to focus on cleaning up of those. Maybe another point would be to focus on improving the observability, profiling, and performance of the app end to end. So we have quite a bit of areas in this regard that we have already identified. Especially one big example is the list performance, which is, of course, always a topic for React Native. And we have to see how we can improve that even more, because especially the latest changes in the experience in Zalando focuses heavily in this type of heat-like lists and list content and so on. So this is very important for the business as well. And I think another big thing is, as Rene also mentioned, the a cross-platform idea with web to see how much we can achieve there and try to then go back and close the circle completely and reuse the ideas here to even update some parts in a web, or maybe even fully reuse some things. And we have to see how that goes. And I think finally, the community contributions that we want to increase even more. So we have had some involvements in the React Native community so far, some contributions to libraries and open source, but also I think, as you know, we had the chance to collaborate with you folks in the React Universe conference, and that was a exciting and fruitful event for us as well. So we are probably going to also continue in that area.
That sounds really good. You mentioned end-to-end testing. I wanted to ask, do you have some sophisticated setup already for your native screens? Because I know the React Native world has slightly different situation with its own set of toolings. I wonder if your approach is more of choosing what's best for both platforms, or maybe trying to somehow test the React Native pieces through whatever is the pipeline you already have.
Yeah, I mean, we're also still early in that sense, that we are also looking into different sets of E2E solutions. It's unfortunately not super straightforward, but we are looking, or we are doing tests in Appium, for example. And from the testing perspective, it doesn't really matter that it's React Native or native, because from that point of E2E testing, it shouldn't also matter, right? Just want to see if certain UI pops up, if the flows work, and so on. So I would say there's nothing React Native specific in this setup. Although we are also looking into other ways. Like I know I still have on my list to look into Detox, which is, I believe, a specific framework for React Native. Which could be interesting because they do this gray box testing where you can also mock things in your application and you create a special E2E build, which is quite interesting. But yeah, that's something open to explore.
All right. That was everything I had planned for today. And I think we have covered most of the questions. I mean, there are still some low-level technical questions, but I think on a general basis, we've gone through it all. And from my side, I think this was very insightful, deep dive into your architecture. And happy that I was able to ask you some of those questions you described already in the article. And I'm happy that your journey with React Native is going well so far. That is from my side. I'm curious what you guys think. Hope you enjoyed it. And this is the part for any closing words. So whether it's thank you or saying hi to the community, feel free to do so. But yeah, generally speaking, I just wanted to say it's been really insightful, and I'm keeping fingers crossed for your React Native integration and the next steps, guys.
Thank you. I mean, from my side, it was a pleasure talking to you, and yeah, it was very nice to dive deep into some technical areas and then go back again on more higher levels. So yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it was really great being here. And I also want to add on, I think what Mike, you in the very beginning said, that we need more companies and people that talk about this openly, maybe take this as a motivation to speak more about React Native. In the end, it's great for all of us.
It's so great that you guys are sharing this story because, as you mentioned earlier, right, you're missing some convincing stories from the community to build the internal business case. So hopefully next company has a little bit of an easier job than you. So it's really great to see companies like you, but also like, for example, HelloFresh recently shared their story about Brownfield migration, and other companies like Amazon strongly supporting the React Native community. So that's really cool to see.
Yeah, Rene, I wanted to say you received comment in the chat. Good last words. So I think You guys are doing this task really well. Well, one last thing I wanted to share. Actually, before I share it, Maciej, it's your closing words turn.
I was happy to be able to share the story of the migration. I think it's a challenging one, given the scale, both of the application and the company. So it is going surprisingly well. And I think it can be in the future, like Irene said, it can be one of the success stories for how you approach React Native, because there are some really cool techniques you develop. I mean, the risking with A/B testing, it's a game changer for companies that want to introduce React Native in a gradual way. So I'm really happy that we're here talking about this and sharing the best practices you worked out.
Awesome. So before we go offline, I just wanted to share this QR code, and thanks to everybody watching us on our platform and on LinkedIn, and perhaps watching us in the future as well. Thanks for spending your time with us and asking questions. If you need any help or have any further follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. You can use this QR code. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm Mike at Callstack, so it's very easy mail, and we're always happy to help. So this is the QR code, and other than that, I think I'll say thank you once again for joining. Asam, Rene, was great to have you, and thank you for spending time preparing. Maciej, Kuba, thanks for joining me today and asking great questions and providing additional context from both business and tech perspective. Thank you so much. It was really great time, and looking forward to further success stories from Zalando.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.